She wasn't trying to call him. Not really. It was muscle memory, that ancient kind of grief that hides in fingertips, not hearts. She pressed his number the way one might trace a scar, knowing it'll sting, needing to feel it anyway. The dial tone rang once, then again, and then. "Elin?" A man's voice. Software. Familiar in the way déjà vu feels like memory. She froze. Her breath caught. A strange shiver ran across her spine, cold and electric. She hadn't heard her name said like that in months. Gentle, unsure, as though it was fragile. She ended the call. It was instinctive, like yanking your hand away from a flame. Her thumb hovered above the redial button for minutes before she finally let the phone drop onto the couch beside her. The room, dim and hushed, swallowed her whole. It had been 7 months since Noah's funeral. 7 months of learning how silence could hum louder than laughter. 7 months of dried flowers, untouched closets, and the slow evaporation of sympathy casseroles from neighbors. Elin had gotten used to the quiet, but not to the emptiness. That night, she barely slept. The voice on the other end was not Noah's, and yet it had sounded like someone who knew her, someone who remembered her. She told herself it was a wrong number. Coincidence, maybe a scammer. But deep down, beneath the logic and the ache, there was a flicker of something else. Not hope exactly, more like curiosity dipped in sorrow. The next morning, after hours of pacing, she called again. The line clicked once. Then, "You came back," the voice said. She should have hung up. Every cell in her body was screaming too. But instead, Elin whispered, "Who are you?" A pause, thick and trembling, spilled into her ear like warm static. The voice answered softly, "That's not the question you really want to ask." Elin blinked. Outside, the morning light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. Everything in her apartment looked the same. But inside her, something shifted. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed tighter to her ear. She tried again. "Why did you say my name?" "I heard it once," the man said. "A long time ago. I didn't expect to hear it again. Not like this." Something about his tone was reverent, not romantic, not eerie, like her name meant something, like it had been missed. Elin felt her throat tighten. "Did you know my husband?" A long breath on the other end, not quite a sigh. "Number?" But I knew the voice that used to call from that number. She didn't know what to say. Her hands began to shake. "You sound tired," he added, as if reading her through the line. She swallowed. "I am." He didn't ask why. They sat in silence, each on their own side of the city, strangers, and yet not. Finally, Elin said, "This number used to belong to my husband. He died 7 months ago." "I'm sorry," the voice replied. And somehow it didn't sound like the kind of sorry you say out of obligation. It sounded earned, full of its own bruises. She didn't ask for his name, not yet, and he didn't offer it. "I won't bother you again," she said. But before she could hang up, he said something that rooted her to the spot. "You don't sound like a bother. You sound like someone who hasn't been heard in a long time. People don't just say things like that, not to strangers, not unless they mean them." The words echoed in Elin's head long after the line went dead. "You sound like someone who hasn't been heard in a long time." It was too specific, too true, and it was terrifying how much she'd needed to hear it. She told herself she wouldn't call again, that it was a one-time fluke, a weird spark in the dark that should stay unlit. But that night, her dreams stitched themselves with his voice. Not her husband's, his. She didn't remember what he looked like in the dream, just that she felt calm, safe, heard. The next morning, Ellen stared at her phone longer than she meant to. She knew the number now. It was still saved in her call log. She hadn't asked for it, but she hadn't deleted it either. Before she could stop herself, her thumb tapped it. Ring. She almost hung up. Then, "Hello?" Same voice. Low, measured, a bit surprised. "I wasn't sure you'd call back," he said. "I wasn't sure either," Aylin admitted. This time she sat by the window, legs curled under her, clutching a cup of tea she forgot to drink. "I didn't catch your name." He hesitated, then offered, "Adam." Simple, plain. But something in how he said it made her think it wasn't the whole story. She gave him hers, too. "Elin?" A quiet moment passed. "You have a beautiful name," he said. She almost laughed. "It's just a name." "No," Adam replied. "It sounds like dusk." She didn't know what that meant exactly, but she felt it. Over the next half hour they talked, not about much. The weather, her garden, his favorite kind of silence. But it was the way he listened, the weight of it. She hadn't felt like a real person in months. But in that phone call, she started to remember the shape of herself. He knew things he shouldn't know. Aylin never told him her husband's name, but when she offhandedly mentioned an old book of poems her husband used to read from, quietly, cautiously, Adam said, "That sounds like something Caleb would have liked." The name hung in the air like static. She didn't correct him. She couldn't. "How do you know that name?" she finally asked, voice low. Adam didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't know. It just came to me." A chill ran down her spine. Elin didn't believe in ghosts, or fate, or signs. She believed in grief, in silence, in what was gone, staying gone. And yet, here she was, wrapped in a cardigan that still smelled like Caleb's cologne, talking to a stranger who spoke as if some part of him remembered her life. That night, she sat on the floor beside the fireplace, a notebook in her lap, the phone to her ear again. "Tell me something real," she said. Adam was quiet. Then he spoke, not about himself, but about her. "You wake up too early. You don't eat breakfast anymore. You keep the light on in one room, not because you need it, but because it makes the house feel less abandoned." Her fingers tightened around the pen. He continued. "You wear your wedding ring when you sleep. You talk to him when no one's around. Not loudly, just enough to feel like he might still be listening." Her breath hitched. "How do you know these things?" "I don't," he said gently, "but I feel them." The line went quiet again, not awkward, not heavy, just full. Ellen wiped at her eyes. "I think you're making things up." "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes the things we make up are truer than the ones we know for sure." That night she didn't dream of her husband. She dreamed of a hallway with no end, a voice that followed her through it, not haunting, but anchoring. And for the first time in weeks, she woke up without crying. He was a stranger, and yet he felt like a memory, not one she could name, not one she could place. But something in the timbre of his voice, the way he paused between sentences, the way he listened, it reminded her of the way Caleb had once held space for her sadness without trying to fix it. She told herself it was coincidence, a projection, her grief playing dress-up in someone else's voice. Still, she answered when he called. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, just listened to the crackle of silence between them, like two people sitting across a dim kitchen table in the early hours of the morning, too tired to speak and too comforted to hang up. Other times the conversation wandered. "Do you believe people can come back?" she asked once. Adam hesitated. "As what?" "As anything." "I think sometimes the ones we love don't leave. Not entirely. Maybe they live in what they leave behind, or in the gaps between things. A laugh, a smell, a phone call that shouldn't have happened." Elin looked at the empty chair across from her, the one Caleb used to fill with stories and Sunday crossword puzzles. It hadn't moved. It hadn't changed. And yet, with Adam's words still ringing in her ears, it felt inhabited. "What if I told you I want to believe that?" she said softly. "I'd say, maybe you already do." There were no flirtations, no confessions, just honesty, just breath meeting, breath over distance. She didn't even know what he looked like. That was the strangest part, how deeply you could miss someone whose face you'd never seen. He asked her about her day. No one had done that in months. And when she told him about the old records she'd found in the attic, about the dusty Polaroids and the handwritten notes in the margins of Caleb's books, he listened like it mattered. "You ever think," he asked quietly, "that some things find us when we're finally still enough to notice?" Yes, she was starting to think exactly that. She hadn't noticed it at first, but the phone calls were changing her. It wasn't anything dramatic, just small shifts, subtle tilts of perspective, a lighter step. The way she reached for the window latch in the morning and actually opened it now, letting in the sound of birds and cold wind. The way she no longer avoided her reflection in the hallway mirror. One morning she caught herself humming. After months of waking into silence that sat like lead in her chest. And the strangest part? She hadn't spoken to Adam in days. He never called on a schedule. Sometimes every night for a week, then nothing for days. And yet the space between the calls wasn't empty. It hummed with the imprint of his voice. Not his words exactly, but the feeling they left behind. That she wasn't invisible. That grief wasn't a wall, but a window. The world outside hadn't changed, but her way of looking at it had. She found herself walking down streets she hadn't set foot on since before the funeral. Not with purpose, not always with a destination, just walking, observing, letting her mind wander through memories like they were old books in a forgotten library. It was on one of those walks that she passed the coffee shop Caleb used to love. She almost kept going, but something made her stop. Go in. The barista, a young woman with tired eyes and chipped blue nail polish, smiled and asked for her order. "Something sweet," Ellen said, "but not too sweet." "Rough day?" Ellen considered. "Number just. A day I thought I wouldn't feel anything. But I do." The barista nodded like she understood. Ellen took her drink and sat in the same corner booth she used to share with Caleb. For a moment, the weight of the past pressed hard against her ribs. But it passed, and in its place there was a strange lightness, a quiet permission to remember without drowning. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her pulse flickered. She answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a breath. "Alan?" His voice, Adam's voice, was softer than she remembered, like he was carrying something heavy and hadn't meant to call. "I wasn't sure if I should," he said. "Why did you?" "Because I think I saw something today, something that belonged to you." She sat straighter. "What do you mean?" "It's probably nothing. A photograph, tucked in an old book I bought at a second-hand shop. It's of a man. He's holding a woman. They look close." Ellen's throat tightened. Was the book blue, with gold trim? Yes. She nearly dropped the phone. That book had belonged to Caleb, and she had donated it by mistake. The past was folding in on itself, threads crossing, unseen patterns beginning to emerge, but none of it made sense yet. All she could do was follow the voice on the other end of the line. It wasn't just a photograph. It was a key. The moment Adam described it, something deep in Ellen's memory unlocked, a flash of that exact image. Caleb's arm around her waist, her head tilted into the crook of his shoulder, the blurry seaside background. It had been taken during a weekend trip she almost forgot they ever took. She'd slipped the photo into that old blue book for safekeeping. Years ago, before the hospital visits, before the long silences, and the final hollow goodbye. Now it had somehow found its way into Adam's hands. And Adam, a stranger who'd picked up her husband's old number, had found her through it. "Can I see it?" she asked. There was a pause. "I can meet you," he said, "if that's not too much." Ellen hesitated. She hadn't seen this man, hadn't even asked what he looked like. It should have felt dangerous, but it didn't. It felt inevitable. They met the next day, a small park bench near a fountain that no longer ran. He arrived on time, holding the book in both hands like it meant something. Adam was older than she'd imagined, mid-40s, graying at the temples, tall with a weariness in his shoulders that mirrored her own. His face wasn't memorable, but his eyes were. Watchful, quiet, like someone who'd spent too long listening to things no one else heard. He handed her the book without a word. She opened it. The photograph was still inside, a little faded, edges curled but intact. She didn't cry, not this time. Instead, she stared at it for a long while, letting the waves of memory roll through her. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "I collect old books," Adam said. "Mostly by feel. That one was sticking out of a shelf in a store I'd never been to before. I almost didn't buy it." "But you did?" He nodded. "Then I opened it, saw the photo, and I don't know. I thought maybe you should have it." She looked up at him. "Why did you even call the number?" He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I was going to disconnect the SIM, but I got curious. I wondered who it belonged to, so I called my own new number. And you answered." It sounded ridiculous, serendipitous, almost like a lie. But she believed him. Because deep down, Elin didn't believe in coincidence anymore. The world, she was starting to realize, wasn't as random as it seemed. Sometimes it moved in strange, quiet ways. Sometimes it used grief as a doorway. They sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, just still. Elin noticed that her hands weren't shaking, that her heart wasn't racing. Instead, she felt grounded, seen. "Do you believe people meet for a reason?" she asked. Adam thought for a moment. "I used to. Then I stopped. Now, I don't know. Maybe we don't meet for a reason. Maybe we're the reason." She smiled, not because she understood, but because she wanted to. He wasn't Caleb, but he spoke into the silences like he understood them. As they sat on the bench, the air cooling with the dusk, Elin realized that Adam didn't try to fix her grief. He didn't offer platitudes, didn't ask her to let go, move on, or be strong. He simply stayed, present, unbothered by the weight of things unsaid. That, she thought, was more intimate than touch. He returned the photo to her slowly, as if he were handing over something sacred. Elin slipped it back into the book without looking at it again. "You remind me of someone," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Your husband?" "Number myself," she replied. "The version of me I used to be when silence didn't scare me." It came out more honest than she intended, vulnerable. But Adam didn't flinch. They walked slowly from the park, the rhythm of their footsteps unhurried. The city around them glowed amber, street lamps humming faintly. Elin hadn't walked beside someone like this in a long time, with no destination, no agenda. Just motion for the sake of feeling the ground under her feet. "I still talk to him," she admitted, "sometimes out loud, sometimes just in my head. Is that strange?" "Not at all," Adam said. "I still talk to someone too." She glanced at him, curious. "My sister," he said after a pause. "She passed away 4 years ago. We weren't close, but the week before she died, she left me a voicemail. I still listen to it, not for her words, but for the silence between them." That struck something in Elin, the silence between words. That was where all her grief lived. And yet, for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, shared. They parted near a tram stop. No promises, no exchanged numbers, just a nod. Quiet, mutual. That night, Elin didn't cry herself to sleep. She didn't sleep well either. But when she woke in the early hours, staring at the ceiling, she didn't feel hollow. She felt raw. And raw, she had come to learn, was the first stage of real healing. She opened the book again, not for the photo, but for the space where it had lived. The paper was thin there, pressed in, worn from years of waiting. She closed it, placed it by her bedside. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She stood, pulled a coat over her nightclothes, stepped out into the empty street, and breathed. The sky was still dark, but a low blush colored the horizon. It wasn't a sunrise yet, but it was coming. Elin had never been good at goodbyes. She hadn't even said it to Caleb. Not properly. Not when the machines went silent, and his hand grew cold in hers. There had been no last words, no promises for the future. Just the quiet hum of a room, the beeping that slowed, and eventually stopped. But this? This was different. The letter that Adam handed her wasn't Caleb's handwriting. It wasn't his voice. It was a finality that felt deeper than any spoken goodbye. It was as if Caleb, even from the other side of death, had found a way to reach her, to give her something that would allow her to let go, without having to say it out loud. "Open it when you're ready," Adam had told her. His eyes, soft and unreadable, held her gaze for a long moment before he walked away. It had been hours since then, but Elin still hadn't touched the envelope. It lay there on the small table by the window, beside the cup of tea she'd forgotten to drink. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. She'd read letters before. Caleb had written her many. But this one felt different. The weight of it somehow felt too much for her to carry. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She stared at it, the screen lighting up with Adam's name. It was the first time he had called her since they'd met in the park. Her finger hovered over the answer button, but she didn't pick up. Instead, she stood up, the letter now in her hand, and walked over to the window. The room was darkening, the evening settling in. She opened the envelope slowly, as if expecting the words to be fragile, to crumble in her hands. She unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dearest Elin, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there. I know you don't need my words to know how much I love you. I know you don't need promises anymore. But I can't leave without giving you something to hold on to. Please don't let the silence you feel between us become a wall. Let it become space. Space to breathe, to remember, and to grow. You've already carried so much for me. Now it's time to carry your own heart, free of the weight of my absence. I'm sorry I couldn't say this to you face to face. But I trust you will understand it now. You are not alone. With all my love, forever, Caleb." Elin's breath caught. She wiped away the tears that were falling without warning, the quiet sting of release she hadn't expected. For the first time in months, she felt a wave of peace. She clutched the letter to her chest, the warmth of it offering a strange comfort. And in that moment, she realized that Caleb had given her something far more valuable than any last words could offer. He had given her permission to live again. A final whisper from the past. The phone buzzed again, but this time she answered. "Hello." Adam's voice was soft, almost as if he had been waiting for her to pick up. "How are you?" he asked, his words a gentle invitation. She glanced at the letter once more, taking a deep breath. "I'm okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." And for the first time in a long while, she meant it. The morning light crept into the room, soft and golden, casting long shadows over the familiar furniture. Ellen sat on the edge of the bed, Caleb's letter still pressed tightly in her hands. She had spent the entire night reading it, rereading it, letting his words sink deep into her heart. It was as though a part of her had finally come home, returning from the far-off place where grief had taken root and held her captive for so long. She had always thought that losing him would mean the end. But Caleb, in his quiet wisdom, had found a way to show her that it was only the beginning. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Elin stood up slowly, unsure of what to expect. She hadn't been expecting anyone. The only people who had visited since Caleb's death were Adam, and even then, only briefly. Still, there was a sense of something stirring, as if today would bring change. She opened the door. Standing on the other side was a woman Elin hadn't seen in years. Her face was older, her hair streaked with silver, but there was no mistaking her. It was Maria, her mother's best friend. The woman who had been a second mother to her when Elin had been little, before everything had fallen apart. "Elin?" Maria's voice was tentative, like she wasn't sure what kind of reception she would get. Elin blinked in surprise, momentarily lost for words. "Maria? What are you? How did you—" "I was in the area," Maria said, glancing down at the bag in her hands. "I thought I'd stop by. I hope that's all right." Ellen stepped aside, allowing Maria to enter. The woman's presence, so familiar and warm, felt like a balm to her raw emotions. She hadn't realized how much she missed having someone like Maria around, someone who knew her from before all of this. "I'm sorry to just show up like this," Maria continued, setting her bag down on the table. "But I've been thinking about you a lot, about how you've been doing." Ellen smiled faintly. "I'm doing okay," she said softly, but the words felt too simple for everything that had happened. "I'm glad to hear that," Maria said, taking a seat across from her. "I know it's been a difficult time. I wanted to check in, see how you're holding up. You know, when your mother passed away, you were just a little girl. I didn't want you to feel alone in all of this." Elin felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she had missed Maria's care, her understanding, until now. For so long she had closed herself off from everyone, unwilling to let anyone in. But Maria's kindness, her steady presence, reminded Elin of a time before the darkness had settled over her life. I don't know where to begin," Elin said, her voice faltering. "I've been holding on for so long, trying to make sense of everything, and now—" She trailed off, unsure of what to say. Maria reached out and gently took her hand. "You don't have to make sense of it all right now. You're allowed to feel however you feel. Grief doesn't come with a timeline." Elin nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. It was the first time in a long while that she felt she could truly let go of everything she had been holding inside. "I know it's hard," Maria continued, "but I also know that you're strong, Elin. You've been through so much, and you've survived it all. You'll make it through this too." For the first time in a long while, Ellen felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was the letter. Maybe it was Maria's kindness. Or maybe it was the simple realization that she didn't have to do this alone. She wasn't alone, not anymore. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, "but I think I'm ready to start moving forward." Maria smiled warmly, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "That's all we can do. Take it one step at a time." Ellen sat back in her chair, looking out the window at the rising sun. It was a new day, a new beginning, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next.